We have spoken much about what it means to live in different worlds, what it means to delve into the depth of our existence. What does this mean for your identity as German, as Jew?
Vielleicht auch vom Status quo, von jetzt zurück sozusagen, das ist vielleicht am geschicktesten. Es ist für mich gegenwärtig noch schwieriger als zuvor und das war schon nicht leicht. Ich erlebe, seit ich in Heidelberg bin, also seit ich nicht jetzt von der frühen Kindheit her, sondern als ich nach meinem Wechsel von Frankreich wieder zurück nach Heidelberg
Maybe it is most skillful again to start with the status quo, start from the now. It is currently more difficult than before, and that was already not easy. Since I have returned to Heidelberg from France for health reasons, I have been permanently exposed to resentment. T. Here are other words I could use, but I don't like them. I constantly experience objections, hatred, unclean speech, stupid jokes, and even massive threats. This I have all experienced in Heidelberg. Really big. But this has made me more resolved to let my real origins blossom. I have turned more decisively to my Jewish origins, to Jewish identity. Also in the quiet towards Jewish thought. Let's call it liturgical thinking, scripture-based, specific laws of Jewish life. I do not have to cook kosher food. I don't mean that. I see myself as an enlightened liberal, but very linked to the committed life of the faith of the fathers. I pay attention to specific things and am at home in this world, after a long, long time. It of course also has specific consequences. In my later years it has partly determined my poetry.
Verpflichteten Leben sehr verbunden und achte auf bestimmte Dinge und bin für mich in dieser Welt zu Hause, nach langer, langer Zeit. Es hat natürlich bestimmte Konsequenzen. Es bestimmt in den späten Jahren jetzt teilweise auch meine Dichtung. Die öffentliche Diskussion gegenwärtig in der Bundesrepublik, da hat sich ja in den letzten 3-4 Jahren Verschiedenes verändert. Die Aggressionen haben zugenommen. Auch die positive Aggression hat zugenommen. Ich will ein Beispiel machen.
The public discourse currently in Germany has changed in the last 2 to 3 years. The aggression has increased. Also the positive aggression has increased. For example, I am, maybe befriended is putting it strongly, but well acquainted with Max Czorluk. We have worked together a bit. His work goes a tiny bit too far. The strong polemic of Czorluk, his historically unclear thoughts I don't like at all. His essays are unsatisfactory and his public appearances, at least in my opinion, does damage to the cause. I do not believe in the implementation of any societally anchored social ethical program towards tolerance. That word does not fit at all. One can't use it here. Maybe acceptance, or how should I say, normality.
Toleranz, das Wort passt hier überhaupt nicht, das kann man hier gar nicht verwenden. Eben Akzeptanz oder, wie soll ich das sagen, Normalität, das ist nicht da.
Isn't it that if we need to speak about tolerance, there is no normality?
Nein, das ist überhaupt nicht normal. Und das spüre ich sehr stark. Und alles, was an öffentlichen Bekenntnissen, diese kalendermäßigen Wiederholungen von
It is not normal at all. And this I sense strongly. I deeply detest everything that is public confessions, these calendar-type repetitions of say the 8th of November, Kristallnacht, the liberation of Auschwitz or other anniversaries and everything around this that is done publicly, the calendrical fuss. I am against it. It is a form of whitewashing. Something I don't want anything to do with. I
In irgendeinem
don't.
Zusammenhang gibt es diese Begrifflichkeit des Whitewashing. Das will ich nicht. Damit will ich nichts zu tun haben.
Was würden Sie
What would you
sich
wish
wünschen?
for?
Ich würde mir wünschen, dass man als Jude in Deutschland, ich rede jetzt nur von Deutschland, ich kenne ja auch andere Zusammenhänge, aber als Jude in Deutschland
I am only speaking here of Germany, even though I know other contexts, but as a Jew in Germany I would wish that firstly, people don't speak to you about the past. Secondly, I would like to be able to be left alone to live in peace in the community as a Jew. Just as it was in Strasbourg where I lived for a long time. It was such a relief. The normality of a Jew going about his daily life, that is the astonishing thing, to go to town and shop, go to the theatre, drive on the tram and go about his business in an ordinary fashion. And not to be asked, during some hypocritical conversation, about why I am wearing a kippah. I don't ask a Catholic priest why he wears a collar. And I wouldn't ask a nun walking around in her habit, why are you wearing that? But I am often asked. I have endless stories to tell. I wrote about this and I am going to repeat it. How can a policeman come to me and say that I provoke open annoyance because I am wearing the kippah? That lets me know exactly what kind of place I am living in. So they can save themselves the effort of all the commemorations and speeches.
Ein Polizist, ich habe es ja auch geschrieben und ich werde es wiederholen. Wie kommt ein Polizist dazu, mir zu sagen, ich errege öffentliches Ärgernis, weil ich die Kippa trage? Da weiß ich doch, wo ich bin. Da bleiben mir doch die Feiertagsreden, die können sich doch das alles sparen. Ja?
Ich meine, das ist auch traurig. Auf der einen Seite natürlich diese Idee, wie hat man Normalität nach dieser Monstrosität der Geschichte?
Ja.
Und
It is so sad. How does one have normality after the monstrosity of history? And maybe as people who live overseas or who are not Jewish, we don't understand that. Because we are stuck in this story, which is always part of the dialogue. Could one hold this dialogue in such a way that this theme does not always hover in the background? And what would this mean? On the one hand, the dialogue wants to make the human visible, but on the other hand, it exactly does not achieve this.
So als Untergrundrauschen immer da ist, weil es natürlich auch das Menschliche irgendwo auf der einen Seite sichtbar machen will, aber auf der anderen Seite genau das nicht tut.
I have never expressed this with the kind of clarity as I want to do now, as a Jew, a Jude, a word I have in my ear when someone shouts from the balcony, "There goes the Jude the rat." Right here in my own neighborhood. As a Jew I have a very clear memory of how I grew up. I am still there. I do not want to be reminded in a hypocritical friendly dialogue of the following two things, that which was, and that I am still here. I don't want to be reminded of that by them. I expect that one could have taken over something from a role. I don't believe in enlightenment. But that a bit of the approach that Lessing introduced in Nathan, the Wise. There is a form of inner freedom intended that is probably not completely satisfactory, but what was laid down as a basis, that is what I expect. This is obviously a misplaced hope. I want to make an example. When the famous actress from the Hamburg Thalia Theatre
Ich erwarte, dass man ein bisschen was, ich glaube nicht an die Aufklärung, aber dass man ein bisschen was übernommen hätte aus dem Ansatz, der sich beim Lessing findet. Also, da ist die Form einer Geistesfreiheit ja intendiert in diesem Stück.
Nathan der Weise.
Nathan, ja, die sicher nicht umsetzbar ist, aber was da angelegt ist, das erwarte ich. Und das ist natürlich eine fehlgeleitete Hoffnung. Aber alles andere, ich will ein Beispiel machen, wenn Moment, wie hat die geheißen, die große Schauspielerin aus der Hamburg, aus dem Thalia Theater, die Ida Ehre, dass man in der Lage ist,
that one even considered to let Ida Airy read Paul Celan's death fugue in Parliament, is an affront without equal. It was intended well, but it was an affront without equal. One should not do that.
Why?
It is as if one would let a guillotine fall and the head is off, and then one says to the head, "Sorry, we didn't really want it like this. I am sorry." If she had read a poem by Heine, Donna Clara.
Wenn sie einen Heine gelesen hätte, die Donna Clara mit den Endstrophen.
I, Senora, your beloved, am the son of the respected, erudite and noble Rabbi Israel of Saragossa. Jews and Moors, let us forget them, says the knight, with soft persuasion, and, into a grove of myrtle, guides the fair Alcalde's daughter.
Das ist in einer Liedform ein so radikales Gedicht.
This one could do. In its song form it is such a radical poem. It also clearly documents the contribution of Heinrich Heine to German literature in his separateness. But to recite the death fugue, that was one voice too far in the context. Of course one can read it, but not in that context.
Das meine ich.
Also das ist auch ein interessanter Punkt, den Sie dann natürlich nennen, weil es geht ja da auch darum, was für ein...
That is interesting point that you make, because it is also about what position Jewish authors had in German literature and especially Heinrich Heine. So that is another point that may manifest inclusion.
Das ist auch nochmal ein Punkt, der diese Zugehörigkeit manifestiert.
Ja, als ich in Israel war, 2019, bin ich an der Hebräischen Universität in Jerusalem, hatte ich ein Kolloquium zu machen. Und da war genau das ein Thema. Es ging darum, im Englischen
Yes. When I was in Israel in 2019, I was at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and I had to hold a colloquium. And exactly that was the topic. It was about Jewish heritage and legacy in German literature of today. And that was the theme that was given, and it fits with what we are speaking about. By the way, Hans Ulrich Gumbrecht from Stanford was also there. We were both born in the same hospital we discovered, in the same city, just a few days apart. And there I was, in a Jewish context, speaking as a Jew, about Jewish heritage and legacy in German literature today. And that was not simple, because we do have some Jewish contemporary writers, but that is not former legacy yet. It only borders on heritage. Sometimes. What I was supposed to speak about in Jerusalem was that which was what happened before that legacy. What had been there before 1933. And that legacy made me reflect very, very, very deeply and has shaped me greatly.
Und das, wovon ich habe in Jerusalem sprechen können sollen müssen, war das, was vor 33 war. Und das war eine Erfahrung, die mich sehr, sehr, sehr nachdenklich gemacht hat und sehr geprägt hat.
And while I was there, I also held a lecture in the Jerusalem headquarters of the Leo Beck Institute. And there was an old Jewish lady. She was very, very old. And I was lecturing and I had a translator who interpreted, and the lecture was also handed out in Hebrew. And suddenly I see that the fine old woman began to cry. After the lecture she briefly came to me. She was an old German Jewish woman, and she said to me that this was the first time in a long time that she heard German poems. She had been unable to do this before.
Es war eine alte deutsche Jüdin, die gesagt hat zu mir, sie hat jetzt zum ersten Mal wieder deutsche Gedichte gehört, die das vorher nie können. Und, das hat sie mir dann erzählt, ich hatte ja verschiedene Veranstaltungen in Tel Aviv und in Jerusalem. Und was die Jerusalemer Situation anging, sie war überall dabei.
I had different events across Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and, in Jerusalem she came to all the events. She followed me around. At the Leo Beck lecture there were also suddenly a whole lot of very young people in the audience. They could have been my grandchildren. very young
Dann
people.
habe ich plötzlich gemerkt,
They also
dass so
came to me. Then I suddenly realized that there were 3 to 4 generations in the room, the dead that are no longer there, for various reasons, the old ones that still came, the middle generation that participate in the Buber/Rosenzweig Institute events or the Leo Beck ones. And then these young people who are in their 20s.
Rosenzweig-Institut macht oder Leo Beck macht. Und dann diese ganz jungen Leute, so wie was weiß ich, Mitte 20.
And it did become clear that from the background of an own biography, I don't mean biographical writing, from the background of an own biography, that to create something artistically that works through the language, that this makes sense, that it has a meaning, that it is not meaningless. That was that experience.
Dass es nicht sinnlos ist. Das ist diese Erfahrung. Und die Frage war ausgehend Deutschland.
Coming back to the question, Germany. In Germany I have experienced the aversion, the violence, the aggression, the institutionalized stupidity, the tolerance of these by the functionaries. They let it go through. They do not penalize these violations. I have experienced this myself. Twice I started proceedings and they were simply closed.
Man stellt das Verfahren ein. Zweimal.
Once I was threatened with a pistol and another time with a cleaver, and I went to the police, and they said let's leave it alone. I told them that I would never go to them again. I am going to buy a gun, and if something happens, I am going to shoot the person in the knee. They will never forget that. They will limp their whole life. I will be convicted and go to jail for assault for 3 years on parole. And it will be worth the cause. But I will never turn towards the police again. And that's what is so important.
Das ist etwas Wichtiges.
That is something very important to talk about. We talk about this ritualization. We are guests of the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Center, and we will surely have a very interesting discussion about the importance of commemoration. We naturally think that through commemoration, through the constant reappraisal of the past, we resolve these conflicts. But there always is an undercurrent. These rituals affect people differently, and it sometimes feels as if this memorialization doesn't work as it should.
Es funktioniert nicht, und auch was ich jetzt erzählt habe, das ist auch etwas, was so passiert und nicht nur einmal. Es war, und das für mich, das ist etwas, was mich sehr, nicht verbittert, das ist nicht das Wort, da gibt es andere Dinge. Verbittert nicht, aber was mich so...
It doesn't work. And what I have told you really happened. And not just once, but a few times. This does not make me bitter, there are other words for it. It does not make me bitter, but I have no faith in the institutions. I am convinced that if political changes were to happen in a certain direction, then that which we have behind us will repeat itself. I don't believe in institutionalized tolerance, to put it that way. One could make a whole film about what I could tell you. I am looking after my mother who is 94, and I am trying to get some information from the director of the nursing home, and he says stop your Jewish gesturing. I'm in a lift, my mother is in the hospital, I am going up and a nurse comes in and says, are you Jewish? Are there still Jews around? In our village there aren't any anymore.
Sagt er zu mir, lassen Sie Ihr jüdisches Gefuchte. Ja? Ich fahre im Aufzug, die Mutter ist im Krankenhaus, ich fahre im Krankenhaus mit dem Aufzug, steigt die Krankenschwester ein und sagt zu mir, sind Sie Jude? Und sage ich, ja. Gibt's die noch? Bei uns im Dorf gibt es keine mehr. Ja.
Such incidents happen everywhere. Then I don't need these calendar celebrations. I don't want them. I don't believe a word of what is being said.
This is so awful what you are telling us. Coming back to your poetry, as you work through language, Is this a way to create a new identity through new language? To find some kind of solace in a poetic utopia amongst all this aggression, this lack of protection?
Nein, ich finde im lyrischen
No.
Gebilde
Within the poetic construct I try to attempt the truthful
den
reproduction.
Versuch der Wahrhaftigkeit der Wiedergabe
There is no solace.
keinen
I once
Trost.
wrote
Ich glaube,
that it
es
is
auch
all
irgendwo
completely
geschehen. Es ist
inconsolable.
trostlos. Es
It is
absolut
absolutely
trostlos.
inconsolable.
Aber es geschieht etwas Eigenartiges.
But something strange happens. I would say that it is not any escapism.
Aber durch die diachrone Gestaltung eines bestimmten Geschehens mit der geradezu musikalischen
But through the diachronic
Veränderung von
crafting of a
Themen
certain event that goes along with a musical alteration of themes, a fullness of time and materiality is enabled.
Widerstand leisten kann,
And this offers resistance against the synchronicity of the concealed horror.
die
that is how I can say.
Gleichzeitigkeit des Kaschierten.
And this enables me while I am reading, and especially if I read it out, and the things are made so that one reads them again, hears them again and once again. To think about what is written here, why is it written in this way, and not differently?
Dann kann im glücklichsten Fall, für je einen Einzelnen, gegendert wird bei mir nicht, also für je einen Einzelnen, die Möglichkeit,
In the best case, this means that for each one of the listeners, there can be the possibility, for example, to hear something individualized.
die Musik der
I can give you an
Kinderchor
analogy,
Mahler
Gustav Mahler's music of the songs of the death of children. One can hear the music individualized. The piece has been played thousands of times and listened to. For me, when I hear them, they become my person songs of the death of children. A poem can achieve the same. For me, there are real sound environmental imaginations that flow into the linguistic expression. That influence what I can do with
Ich
it.
habe da wirklich tonkörperliche Vorstellungen in der Sprachlichkeit, was ich damit machen kann. Oder um ein anderes Beispiel zu nehmen, weil es aus der Bilderei kommt, wenn man die Gemälde von Francis Bacon anschaut, dann hat
Or
man
another
auf dem
example
ersten
from the
Blick die
visual
Darstellung vom
arts.
menschlichen Schlachthaus in
If you look at the paintings of Francis
Wenn man aber
Bacon,
genau
you
schaut,
first see the depiction of a human slaughterhouse and cage. But if you look carefully, and I have done that often and patiently, these works by Bacon display such extraordinary technique that has hardly been surpassed by anyone in his era. I know that Lucian Freud is a smudger compared to this, who wants to impress with the superficial depiction of rotting bodies. It is laughable. Also like Abramovich. That is silly.
Das ist lächerlich. Oder die Abramovich, das ist lächerlich. Beim Bacon wird
Whereas Bacon depicts the property of beauty, how the disaster of its woundedness is inherent in that beauty. That lies inside the beauty depicted or shown, not depicted as it is not theatre. And these fine constructed lines in these pictures, we should talk about this at another time. This is a form of Baroque ornamentation that plays its role. That is a whole other story. That leads to somewhere else. But I wanted to make this comparison, because if I place pictures next to my poems, then I would turn to Bacon's paintings. For example, because I see correspondences. Yes, this is how I could say this. That is fine.
So in principle there is solace in the vulnerability?
Yes. Yes, this is how one can say that. It is a very lonely solace.
Also subscribe to the existentiality of the human condition.
Yes, it is what Beckett calls, to keep failing. It is exactly that. I don't know, I was 22 or 23. In one night, I never forgot that. I always worked on pieces of paper. Until today.
die Zettel.
In the meantime they became famous,
Ich habe in der
these
Nacht
pieces of
aufgeschrieben,
paper.
irgendwann in der Nacht
I wrote in the
2 und 3.
night, somewhere between 2 and 3. Even the
Auch
failure
das
has to
Scheitern
succeed.
muss
And
gelingen.
that is one of those themes.
Und das war
Then
dieses
later I
Fertig
found
so
this
ein
Beckett's
Thema.
sentence about failing once again.
Und später habe
Or,
ich dann eben
let's
diesen
leave it
Beckett
for
dazu
now.
mit dem
Let's leave it for now.
abermals zu scheitern oder ja, lassen wir.
Ich glaub, wir haben
I
auch
think
den
we offered
Lesern
our
jetzt
listener
oder den
enormous
Zuhörern ganz
food for
viel
thought.
gegeben.
Let's
Und
leave it for now.